one bomb that dropped but didn't explode not far from me. I stopped like an idiot to have a look. What I saw on it surprised me. On it had written with big letters, property of NATO.
Welcome to a new episode of Most Memorable Journeys. I am sitting here with a very, very fascinating man, and I've actually tried to record this episode a while ago, but I was listening so fascinated that we didn't manage to record it last time, so today we're going to do it. I'm sitting here with Captain Adamos Marneros. I found out that he was the last pilot who landed at Nicosia Airport the 20th of July 1974, which was just before the Turkish army invaded Cyprus and before the airport closed forever. So, Adamos Marneros, welcome to Most Memorable Journeys.
Thank you. Nice to see you.
And thank you so much for being on this. Let's talk a little bit about being a pilot and why did you want to become a pilot? Because we're talking about many years ago. What happened? How did you decide to become a pilot?
Well, Elizabeth, I was born in 1944, living in the village of Polymytia, where I grew up. As I became a teenager, I was a very anxious boy. I was looking for something. I didn't know what I was looking for. But one thing that attracted me is anything that flies. Birds, kites, and the occasional aeroplane flying over village, which those days were all propelled aircraft like DC-3s and DC-4s. And the noise attracted me up in the sky until I lost sight of the aircraft. One day, at the age of 14, a cross spray arrived in Cyprus to spray the plantations of the Lanidis family. And I saw this little aeroplane and ran in the fields until I discovered where it landed. It landed in a small stretch of an airfield. It wasn't an airfield, it was a stretch of a road. I begged the pilot to let me have a look at it. He did, but when I asked him to take me up, he said no. And I was so upset. And I walked back home 2.5 hours after that. And I thought, I want to be a pilot. I must be a pilot. But those days, there were no Cypriot pilots. It wasn't known of how to become a pilot. So, but in my youth, as a child, being a sort of businessman, I would say, I used to, in the springtime, go in the fields and pick up violets and all the wildflowers, bring them home, make them into bunches, and I used to climb under the barbed wire into the British village that it was built after the Eoka uprising here in Cyprus, where all the British families of the servicemen working from Episcopi and Akrotiri were living. So I found an opening under the barbed wire, and I used to illegally go and knock on the doors and sell this to the families. One day, I knocked on the door, and a very kind lady said to me, "How many bunches you got there?" I said, "Maybe about 20. She said, "I have them all." Her name was Mrs. Swinburne. And she said, "Come on in, come and have a cup of tea." So, with my little English, I accepted. And she made me a cup of tea, and she paid me for the 20 bunches. Just before I left, a gentleman walked in a pilot's uniform. Her husband, Captain Swinburne. Mrs. Swinburne introduced me to him, and I said, "You a pilot?" He said, "Yes, I fly from Akrotiri." I said to him, "I want to be a pilot." He said, "Really? I help you." And this man guided me, helped me, got me some books, aviation books, and he even booked for me a medical at Akrotiri Hospital to establish whether I was fit to be a pilot. And so he took me under his umbrella, and he was guiding me, helping me, and telling me what I need to do to become a pilot. When I finished the college, there were no jobs available in Cyprus in 1960. I worked as a docker at Limassol Docks. And the manager of the company there asked me if I want a better job. It's an office docks body, really. And I accepted, even at a lower salary. But when I told him I wanted to become a pilot and go to England and train, he very kindly gave me a free ticket and collected about £50 from the rest of the staff and wished me good luck. First time I would have been in an aeroplane as a passenger. That was a Comet that took me from Nicosia Airport to London Heathrow with a suitcase and £50 in my pocket with a dream of becoming a pilot. I don't want to bother you into that.
Because you did become a pilot.
Because I did. At the end, yes.
You did, and you made it. And who was your first employer then? Who did you work for once you had trained?
Actually, if you don't mind, I'll say that I was, with the help of Captain Swinburne, he arranged an interview for me with the Ministry of Civil Aviation in the UK to join the RAF.
Okay.
And they accepted me. They gave me a commission to fly Buccaneers on aircraft carriers, training in Cromwell. And I had a secure place to start in October 1965. Having left Cyprus in 1963, in October 65, I had a commission to start with the RAF. But in the meantime, before having passed my GCEs, which were required by the RAF, I had 3 months free to prepare myself. So I went and got myself a job as a waiter in Great Yarmouth in England, East Anglia. And there I was working to buy myself some clothes and everything ready to go into commission with the RAF. But one morning I received a telegram saying that my brother was seriously injured in a car accident. Would I go home? All the money I had saved went on an air ticket, came to Cyprus. But before leaving UK, I had an interview with the Civil Aviation Training School at the London School of Flying in just north of London. And they offered me a position there to start in February 1966. I accepted it, but didn't have the money. So they registered me down as a candidate. Then this telegram arrived, came to Cyprus. My brother had died. He was 17 years old. At the funeral, a cousin of my mother's approached me and asked me what I was doing in England. I explained to him that I had a definite training course with the RAF in October, and also a civil aviation training course, the London School of Flying, in February. And he asked me, how much money do you need? I said, I need £3,800 then. But to start with, £1,500 to get me through the first part of the license would have been acceptable. So he lent me the money without any guarantee. Off I went to England. I canceled the course with the RAF, and I started with the London School of Flying in February 1966. Then I needed the extra money for the second part of the license, but luckily the airlines were desperately looking for pilots those days, and I had 3 sponsorships offered to me, one by Nicosia Airways, Dan Air, and British Midland. I chose Invicta because they were paying me £22 a year more than the other two. Money was very important those days anyway. So
it still is.
I started training for the second part of the license with a commitment to work with Invicta for 3 years. And I finished, started flying with Nicosia Airways, based at Manston Airport in Kent. A little airline, but very fun flying with them. They paid for the sponsorship, and my commitment was to work with them for 3 years. A year later, they went bankrupt, and I was left without job. And obviously, I had to look for another job. At that time, there was an airline being started in Malta.
Oh, yeah. So tell me about how you ended up in Malta.
Melita.
Yeah.
The ex-chief pilot of Pan America was the chief pilot of this airline, and he was recruiting. And some friends of mine said, why don't you apply as well? They were looking for pilots to fly the brand new Boeing 737s based in Malta. So I applied, and he accepted me, and I started the training course here in the UK with Britannia Airways on the brand new 737. When I finished that, I ended up in Malta waiting for the aircraft to arrive from the States and to also complete the training on the aircraft. But for political reasons, the airline did not get off the ground. And I found myself about 6 months after I arrived there, out of a job. The agreement was, whilst I was in Malta waiting for the aircraft, was that we would live free at the Hilton Dragonara, but no salary. So all the little cash that I took with me disappeared. I couldn't eat outside the Hilton. I couldn't move outside the Hilton because I didn't have any money. But then when the government decided to put the screws on Air Melita for political reasons, I had to get back to England somehow. And I flew back as a stowaway on the British Airways merchantman.
As a stowaway, did you hear that?
As a stowaway, yes. How did I manage that? I put on my pilot's uniform, left everything behind that I took, the little suitcase, just my briefcase, and with the arrangement with the senior steward and my ex-wife, who was a British Airways stewardess, they advised me to be the last to board. Having seen everybody boarding the aircraft, I waited until the last passenger boarded. So I walked right across the tarmac, went up the stairs, and then straight into the toilet, took my uniform on, put a sweater on, and found the first seat, sat down, had beautiful service all the way to London.
Good old times. I don't think that would be possible today, would it, to just walk?
I don't know.
Maybe.
Today with the security,
it would be difficult.
It won't be. But whilst I was in Malta, I must have written every week a letter to Cyprus Airways. I rang Cyprus Airways and asking them if they were looking for pilots to employ me. But because Cyprus Airways was totally run by British pilots, and the chief pilot was British, and the rest of the crew were all British, they didn't want to open the floodgates for Cypriots to get in. Quite naturally, I understand that. Cyprus Airways was the dream of an airliner for retired British Airways pilots and other young ones that British Airways trained but didn't want. So why will they employ me? But I kept telling them my address, where it was, I was in Malta, in the Dragonara Hilton, and also I was sending them my CV, which was very limited anyway. So I find myself in London with not knowing where to go. But I thought, I will go to Kent, to Ramsgate, where I used to live before Invicta went under, and to my digs. I used to rent a room at a house belonging to Mrs. Godfrey, a nice old lady. But I didn't have the money to buy myself a ticket. So my girlfriend and my wife, ex-wife, lent me £5, bought myself a ticket, one-way ticket to Kent, Ramsgate in Kent, and I walked up to Mrs. Godfrey. And she opened the door, and she was shocked to see me after about 6-7 months. And I explained to her what happened. I asked her if my old room was still available. And she said, yes, my son, of course it is. I said, can I stay? Yes, of course you can. I have no money. Don't worry. When you get a job, you pay me. Made me a cup of tea and a sandwich. And she showed me back to my room. Came down, and she said, by the way, a letter arrived for you the other day. And I said, oh, for me here? Yes. I looked at the envelope. It said on the outside, Cyprus Airways. Well, I ripped it off and read the letter inside, which was saying, you are invited for an interview at the Sky Hotels Heathrow at 10 o'clock the next day. So I thought, this can only be a miracle. Borrowed £10 from Mrs. Godfrey.
She was a nice lady, that
Absolutely
Mrs. Godfrey,
wonderful.
wasn't she? Yes.
I booked myself a train ticket. I arrived at the Skyways Hotel right outside Heathrow Airport at 9 o'clock. Interview was at 10 o'clock. I waited until 10 o'clock, and I went to reception, asked to get in touch with Captain Peter Wolf, the chief pilot who was to interview me. And they said, no, I'm afraid he's out. His key's here. Anyway, I waited. He rolled in at 11:15, and I recognized him because I have seen pictures of him. I went to him and I said, Captain Wolf, my name is Adamos Marneros. I have an interview with you at 10 o'clock. And he said, oh, yeah. Give me half an hour and I'll be down. He came down in half an hour. We found a corner in the reception area, and we started the interview. And he was asking me about my experience. I said, well, you haven't been reading my letters I've sent you with my CV? He said, well, you tell me, what have you flown? I said, I have flown Vikings, I have flown DC-4s, and I did a ground school training for a Boeing 737. He said, why should I employ you? I have so many ex-British Airways qualified pilots on the Trident, and they're ready to come in and jump in. And I said, in other words, you haven't been reading my CVs that I've been sending you. Do you realize what I had to go through to get back here for the interview today? He said, no, it doesn't matter to me. In other words, you're telling me you cannot employ me. He said, yes, that's true. And I said, well, I'm a Cypriot. He said, it doesn't matter. He said, I want to employ the most qualified ones. I said, fair enough, but you wasted my money and my time. And to be honest, I started crying and I left. I went back to Mrs. Godfrey's digs, and I got myself a job as a taxi driver. And I was earning enough to pay the rent, to feed myself, and to also save some money to send to my mother, because we had 8 brothers and sister offsprings to feed, and I was helping with the survival of the rest of the family. And whilst I was taxi driving, One day I arrived back to my digs, and Mrs. Godfrey says to me, that was about 3 months later, there's another letter for you that arrived here. And I thought, well, who knows this address? I'd never given it to anybody, and I certainly did. Cyprus Airways didn't have that when I was living in Malta. And that was, again, a letter from Cyprus Airways. I opened it up. He was telling me that I was successful at the interview, and I would be starting a training course with British Airways Training Center in October 1969. And of course, I was elated of that. And that's how I came to join Cyprus Airways.
That's amazing. So you were the first Cypriot pilot, weren't you, for Cyprus Airways?
The first Cypriot captain, because in the meantime, they sponsored one other boy, Cypriot boy, with British Airways to train as a pilot. But I was the first captain.
Yes. Yeah. And you started working for them. Cyprus Airways was growing at the time, wasn't it?
Yes. When I joined, there were 2 Trident aircraft, and then another 2 arrived. And then we leased a Bag 111 as well. And the airline would have grown until the war in 1974.
Yeah, and that's so you were flying for Cyprus Airways, and things were heating up in Cyprus. I want to talk a little bit about that famous flight, CY317 on July 19th. You were flying from Larnaca, you see. I'm used to saying Larnaca because that's the airport that I know. I've never flown from Nicosia, but you were flying from Nicosia to London on that day. What happened?
Yes, I was promoted to a captain in May 1974, and I had completed 4 flights in command. On the 18th of July 1974, I was scheduled to fly my 5th flight in command to London. Having said that, Nicosia Airport was closed due to the coup which the junta carried out to depose Makarios. But they reopened again on the 18th of July, and I scheduled to take out the first flight to London. And on that flight, I took with me my wife and little daughter, Nicola. And we arrived in London late evening of the 18th of July. On the 19th of July, the next day, I was scheduled to bring back the aircraft via Rome, CY317, a scheduled flight, London, Heathrow, Rome, Nicosia. But all night of the 18th and during the day of the 19th, I was glued on the TV. I was switching from BBC One to ITV. And all I could see was ships, Turkish ships being loaded with armored vehicles, soldiers, aircraft being loaded with bombs. And it was obvious that an invasion of Cyprus was imminent. And the British reporters in Izmir and in Ankara were describing a situation of an imminent war. So I was so anxious that really there was no joke. This was for real. Although the politicians with the Turkish Prime Minister Ecevit, they were declaring that they were carrying out military exercises. But of course, anybody with brain will realize that this was just a political gimmick. And my desperation, I rang the general manager in Cyprus and told him what I was seeing on TV in UK and asked him whether we should cancel the flight back to Nicosia and he was adamant that the flight should go on. But now I understand why he He was adamant. He was under a lot of pressure from the puppet president that was bestowed after the expulsion of Makarios, that all foreign nationals should leave Cyprus. The government was being under a lot of pressure from the embassies of the various expatriates who were holidaying, mainly in Famagusta, and mainly British, to return them back to their countries. So the general manager had no option really but to advise me to go back. But then I rang the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in the UK, and I spoke to a gentleman called Mr. Humphreys and told him who I was and my predicament, and asked him for advice. Well, he said, I can't really tell you any details, but let's put it that way. If I was in your position, I wouldn't go. I said, thank you, but it's not up to me anyway. So the 19th in the afternoon, I was scheduled to take the flight back to Cyprus. I gathered the crew and I told them what I did. The general manager insists that we should return. We have no option. So we went to Heathrow to meet the incoming aircraft. When I spoke to the incoming crew, they were surprised that we were going back. So I rang the general manager again and pleaded with him we should cancel the flight. And he said, no, I said the flight should take place. So I said, in that case, I am the captain. The flight is scheduled through Rome. We have no passengers for Rome or to take to Rome. Therefore, I will carry out the schedule. He said, do what you want, but as long as you bring the aircraft back. Well, on the flight, we had 7 passengers, a family of 4 Greek Cypriots, father, mother, and 2 daughters, and a couple of Turkish Cypriots with their son. So that's all. We arrived in Rome late at night and asked my co-pilot to go into the office and send a telegram to our operations department and ask what the situation was in Cyprus. The message came straight back and said, everything is very quiet. The airport is guarded by EOKP commandos, the people that carried out the coup to Makarios, and it's all very quiet. I said, no chance of you speaking to the general manager again and ask him if he changed his mind? They said, well, we wouldn't dare wake him up at this time of the night. I asked the engineers to check the aircraft inside out, mechanically, hoping that we will find something wrong that would give me a good reason to cancel the flight. But unfortunately, and I say unfortunately, sarcastically, because everything was perfect. So at midnight, Rome time, we took off for Nicosia. Very quiet night. We were the only aeroplane flying in the Eastern Mediterranean. We have not had any other aircraft until we hit Rhodos. At Rhodos, we turned right direct to Nicosia. And as normal, we had the radar screen scanning the sea, showing us the coastline of Turkey and then later on the coastline of Cyprus. Just outside Antalya, which is not far from Rhodes, we noticed 5 dots which I'd never seen before. And we examined them carefully. We could even see the wash from these ships, and straight away we assumed they were Turkish ships heading for Cyprus. When we crossed the boundary into the Greek Cypriot airspace, I mentioned this to the air traffic controller, that I can see 5 ships heading for Cyprus. He noted that, and then he made no comment. He thanked me for that, and we continue. Then the coast of Cyprus, firstly Paphos area, was painting on the radar. And I noticed outside port of Paphos, 6 dots, all gathered more or less together. And I mentioned that to the air traffic control of Nicosia again. They noted that, and it turned out that these 6 dots was the American Sixth Fleet. That's what we found out after the war. But at that time, we were descending, and I asked air traffic if I could stay at 15,000 feet and do a circle of Cyprus. Now, time then was 3:55 in the morning. I started with Larnaca and made a left turn towards Famagusta. Outside Famagusta port, I noticed a very huge dot with 2 other smaller dots. And then I took a piece of paper, drew the map of Cyprus, and I started putting on that where I see the dots. And I mentioned this again to the air traffic control. It turned out this was the British helicopter carrier, Hermes, which came over in preparation to evacuate the British nationals. Went towards Cape Andreas and then made a left turn towards Kyrenia. That's where I saw 6 dots almost touching the coast of Kyrenia and another 5 dots just outside Messina of Turkey. Well, I counted all the ships then, 21. I mentioned it to air traffic control and I said, please, can you speak to the military headquarters in Kyrenia area and tell them what I'm seeing? I am of the opinion that the invasion had already started because the dots outside Kyrenia were very close to the coastline. And then eventually they came back within 30 seconds and told me, the military in Kyrenia say that everything is normal. They instruct you to land as soon as possible. I said, no, wake up my general manager again and tell him. They did. He came back within 40 seconds and he said, the general manager says you must land immediately. A few years later, when Adamos Marneros wrote a book about the last flight to Nicosia, he interviewed the air traffic controller who was speaking to me at Nicosia, and he told him that a Greek army officer had a gun on his head and instructed him to tell me to land as soon as possible. That explained why the answer to my questions came back so quickly.
That's crazy. I mean, you could see what was going to happen and nobody wanted to hear it.
Exactly. Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
I landed at Nicosia at 4:10 in the morning. The passengers went through the normal channels and we went through customs clearance, and there was a Greek police officer, and he was asking me what was going on, if we see anything up there. And I said, yes, here is the map. All the ships, we're surrounded with ships. He said, can I keep it? I said, yes, you keep it. And then we went to our office, operations office, to clear the logs and the details of the flight. And the crew there wanted to know exactly what was happening. I said goodnight to my staff, my crew. They went, and I was the last to leave. I went outside into my car and started the engine, but I could hear the engine roaring like a tractor. I turned it off, and the engine continued. I got out of the car, and I looked up on the sky as dawn was breaking, and I could see about 15, 20 turboprop aircraft dropping parachutes over Nicosia Airport. And at the same time, the fighters, the F-104s, were dropping napalm bombs to the army camp right next door to the airport. And it turned out they killed many, many Greek soldiers in their sleep. And then I had a decision to make. What do I do? Do I stay here or do I jump in my car and go home? I did. I decided to go home, knowing that if I'd stayed there, I would have been shot. But again, knowing that I might have a bomb dropped on me on the way to Nicosia. Well, on the way to Nicosia, I saw a few F-104s dropping bombs left, right, and center. But I saw one bomb that dropped but didn't explode, not far from me. I stopped like an idiot to have a look. What I saw on it surprised me. On it had written with big letters, property of NATO. That was a NATO bomb that was being used to kill us.
Yeah, that's another story. I think that is really, the whole situation, the whole political part of this invasion would be material for another podcast.
Absolutely.
I wanted to sum it up. This was the last time a plane ever landed at Nicosia Airport, and then it closed forever.
Absolutely. And the aircraft that I landed there was bombed and exploded into pieces by the Turkish Air Force because some idiots drove it, pushed it onto the runway to prevent Turkish aircraft landing there. Stupid idea, but nevertheless, it's now in pieces.
And all Cyprus Airways planes at the time were lost.
All of them.
All
yes.
of them were lost,
Yes.
and there was no more airport and no more aircrafts. And
Absolutely. No airport, no aircraft, except one aircraft was rescued by taking pieces from the other 3 Tridents and rescued it, flew it to Tel Aviv for proper maintenance, and from there to London, where British Airways flew it for a while. And now it's in Duxford Museum in England.
wow.
That aircraft.
I want to jump a little bit here because a lot of things happened. Obviously, the invasion happened. 200,000 people lost their homes. But, life went on. Life always goes on. When did flights start again? When did the airport open again? Because
Well, after the second invasion stopped, I decided to leave to go back to England. The only way I could get to England was via a ship, a passenger ship that arrived in Limassol, and then to Athens, Piraeus, then Athens Airport, and fly there to London on British Airways, which I did. But would you like to know what happened on my...
yeah, well, briefly, yes,
Briefly,
yes,
yeah.
yes, I know, because it's interesting what happened on that ship, yes.
Well, on that ship, I saw the ex-puppet president, Nikos Samson, who was going to Greece illegally to speak to the Greek government. And he was really an amazing conversation I had with him, but obviously it's too long.
It's a crazy bit of information and very political as well. But let's go on. I want to talk a little more about Cyprus Airways and how it continued.
Well, I was in England and trying to find a job, but difficult at that time. There were no pilot jobs available, so I worked as a waiter and as a painter for a while. But then I received a call from the general manager asking me to go back to Cyprus to help a team to look for a new airport. I arrived back the same way as I left, by Athens and by ship. And then we went looking to find an old World War II airfield, which was rumored to have been built in Larnaca. And we did. We found some foundations there, and with the help of a few diggers, we cleaned it up, which was a rubbish collection area of Larnaca. We found out, yes, there was an airfield there, and that's the present runway, Larnaca Airport. And from there, we had some sheds built as departure and arrival lounges. That's where Larnaca is now.
That's how it started again.
We started again in April. In March 1975, we went to British Midland to train on Viscount aircraft, which we leased from British Midland. Then we completed the course and we started flying with Viscounts. Then we extended the runway and we leased Douglas DC-9s to fly as far as Salonika, and then from Salonika to London. And then eventually they extended the runway a little bit more, and we leased the DC-8. We were able to fly direct to London, to Muscat, to Dubai, and Paris, yes. So, and that's Larnaca Airport took off then.
Yeah, but you were telling me in a previous conversation about flying goods. You were taking out seats in the night.
During the Viscount era, we used to take the seats out in the evening, and we will fly a load of Sultana grapes and melons to Beirut, and from Beirut on TMA cargo airliner to Europe.
Amazing.
Yes. And that was the way for the country to start
trade. To start to make some money. So how much longer did you work for Cyprus Airways after that? Because that was also quite a political matter, wasn't it?
Yes, it was. It was. I joined Cyprus Airways in 1969, and in 1984, I became the chief pilot of the airline. But I wasn't getting on very well with the unions and with the various chairmen of the airline because they were under instructions from the then government to keep good relationship with the unions. And of course, that came into a conflict with safety. And I wasn't really tolerating that. I left in 1990 and I joined Airbus Industries. Airbus Industries offered me the job as a flight trainer.
I want to interrupt you here because you were mentioning safety. Can you remember any dangerous incidents on any flights in your time with Cyprus Airways?
Of course.
Yeah.
Not only with Cyprus Airways. I mean, anybody that flies for 38 years and doesn't have any incidents is lying. My first incident was on the 8th of July 1968 when I was flying for Invicta. I was a co-pilot of DC-4s. We had a contract to fly missiles to Addis Ababa, Ethiopia, for Haile Selassie.
Oh my God, yes.
And that aircraft, DC-4, with the load, wasn't really suitable aircraft to do that trip. But of course, the company didn't want to lose the contract, so we did it. We did a Coventry, Malta, nice stop, Malta, Cairo, nice stop. The next day, long trip, 10 and a half hours from Cairo to Addis Ababa. Weather on forecast was, as we were told, perfect. When we arrived over Addis Ababa, the weather was terrible. Low cloud, rain, and we couldn't land. We attempted twice. We could not see the runway legally on minima. So on the third attempt, we decided we only had enough fuel to do one more attempt. And on the third attempt, we decided we will go until we either crash or see the runway. Eventually, we saw the runway at 150 feet instead of the minimum 400 feet, and we landed. But when we reached the end of the runway, we were so exhausted and drained, put the parking brake on with the engines running, and after 1 minute, one by one, the engines were shutting down due to lack of fuel.
Oh my God.
So we came very close to death.
Yes.
The other incident I had, of course, is what I described in 20th July 1974.
Yeah.
And on the 8th of December, 75, when I was flying DC-9s, I had a trip from Athens to Larnaca, but the weather in Larnaca was bad. We could not land. So we diverted to Tel Aviv, which was assigned diversion airfield. When we arrived over Tel Aviv, we had 4 Phantom fighters just checking us to see whether we are an airliner and not
an enemy.
An enemy of Arafat's sending an aircraft full of bombs over Tel Aviv. But eventually we landed safely there. And on the 25th of December 1990, whilst I was flying for the Sultan of Brunei, we took off from London en route to Brunei via Karachi. A long trip for the Airbus A310 London to Karachi. But over Russia, we were informed that the airway was shut. The airway that we were using was shut, and we had to find an alternative method to proceed, which we couldn't. Eventually, they threatened, unless we diverted, they threatened us, they will send the bombers to shoot us down. And having in mind that the Air Korean in April 1978, when they shot down killed 269 people because he varied off the airway, I decided, let's head back. I requested to return back to Heathrow with the approval of His Majesty, but they refused to allow us to do that, and they insisted we should land in Moscow. And just as we were ready to start our descent in Moscow, they came back and apologized and asked us to proceed back to our destination, Karachi, if we wanted to. And that was a very scary moment.
That sounds a bit like a movie, doesn't it? It's like a movie.
It is.
Now, in this, you mentioned the Sultan of Brunei. You started working for the Sultan of Brunei after you left Cyprus Airways. Which year was that?
In 1990, when I left Cyprus, I joined Airbus industry, and they sent me for an interview with His Majesty, and he selected me to fly and train him on the Airbus. To train him is not the right word. He used flying as his hobby. I joined in July 1990, and the contract was for 1 year. I did 4 years with him full time. Then I took time off to look after my wife, who had a spinal operation, hoping that she would recover and I'll return back. But in the meantime, I was flying maybe 2 or 3 times a month just to keep my recency for my license. And I did that for another 4 years, but unfortunately, she never recovered enough for me to return back to flying full-time with the Sultan. And that was an absolute, unbelievable experience. A wonderful man, wonderful people, and wonderful environment. And I was so thankful that I had that opportunity to end my career that way.
That's beautiful.
In 2003.
What a beautiful experience.
Yeah.
Now we're coming to the end, where I could talk to you for hours and hours, but we are coming to the end of this interview, but I want to ask you, because you have been flying a lot, obviously as a pilot, but you've also been flying as a passenger. And you were telling me, I think at some point you went to Sri Lanka for an interview and you were put in first class. You had some fantastic flights.
Absolutely.
What do you think about today's low-cost carriers and about these airlines that have appeared all over the place?
Mm-hmm. Today's low-cost carriers are not the same as the low-cost carriers who were in the 1960s, 70s, Invicta being one of them. Today, low-cost carriers are under a lot of scrutiny. CAA, especially of the UK, have tightened up the ropes, and they are absolutely making sure low-cost carriers abide to the stringent regulations that they impose. And I can name, if I may.
Of course, yes.
EasyJet is a low-cost airline. It's not so low-cost on the fees they apply, but I would say, and having flown with them many, many times, they are superb. So low-cost carriers these days are not, especially the British low-cost carriers, are as good as any other airlines like British Airways and
are safe.
And safe.
And are safe.
And absolutely safe.
Yeah.
Yes.
So there is another thing that I wanted to ask you. Oh, yeah. I wanted to ask you, who was your most famous passenger ever?
Elizabeth, yeah.
It was me. I'm sure I was on a flight with you too.
You probably were.
Yes.
You were not the most important one.
Who was it?
Now, in my years of flying, I have flown kings, queens, presidents. I even flew Arafat.
Did you?
On a quick flight from Damascus to Cyprus for a few hours, and then I flew him back. I flew Princess Diana, but the most important passenger for me is, without any doubt, my mother.
Oh, that's so sweet. That's so sweet. And of course, I'm sure she was treated well on those flights when she was flying with you. How very beautiful.
Absolutely.
I think that's a very beautiful way to end this interview. One last thing I want to say, because we had a talk about this. If you were young today, you told me something. If you were young today, you would probably become an astronaut.
Absolutely. If I was a 15, 16-year-old, my aim would have been to work towards becoming an astronaut. I love to go to the moon. I love to feel, not just to go outside the atmosphere, but to land on the moon. And I would have achieved it. I can guarantee you that.
I am sure you would.
Yes.
Knowing you, I have no doubt that you would achieve that.
Yeah, but I will not aim for being a pilot today.
Okay.
Do you know why?
No, tell me why.
I started flying in 1966, 67. I was employed for my first job. Those days, we had a captain, a co-pilot, a radio operator, a navigator, and we flew the aeroplane. Today, the aeroplane flies like a computer.
Yeah.
And it's not the same. The aircraft can land automatically. It can stop automatically. It can navigate from A to B, 17-hour flight without even touching the controls. All you do is feed the computer the correct information.
So it's no more fun.
No fun.
No fun.
No, but I was lucky enough to have experience.
I think you've had
real flying.
Beautiful life of flying and a beautiful career as a captain. Captain Marneros, it was a pleasure talking to you. Thank you so much for spending time with me.
It was a pleasure meeting you and spending your time with me. Thank you.
If you enjoy my podcast, please like, share, and subscribe to my channel. You will find all the information in the show notes.